But it's good to see so many of you out today. I count 31 of you here today. Last time we had 40. Is it because the weather's getting a little warmer? So by April, we don't want to be down to 4 or 5 feet. But it's good to have everybody here today. I really feel blessed because when I left our very first time we were here back in January, and just 3 weeks ago, February 5th, I left saying, there's some very, very smart, bright people in that room. I'll give yourselves a hand, you bright people. I think all of you learned something from each other.
Yes.
Sometimes it was really nice to see this little contentious battle going on. We had one individual who was in the minority, he said. Everybody was coming down real hard on him. That was good to see. So I feel blessed that we have shared a lot over the past 2 sessions, and including today, we have 3 more sessions to go. Also good to see Lois DeLoach with us today. She made it, bless her heart. And who else is new? Anybody else new today? Okay, good. All right. When we met last, Mr. Sanders said he had a bone to pick with me, and that bone was that this is too much reading. For that one session, it was just too much, and it was a lot. Well, he probably doesn't have a bone to pick this time. I think they were reasonable set of reading this time. The readings carried me back though, and I was carried back because back during the late 1920s and 1930s, beginning with Fisk Institute, Fisk decided that they were going to find as many former slaves as possible and interview those slaves. And in 1929, they came out with a publication entitled God Struck Me Dead. God Struck Me Dead, published in 1929 by Fisk. And from that, all of you know about the Great Depression of the 1930s and efforts to put people back to work, and so there were many of these alphabet agencies that were established, including the Works Project Administration. And out of that, of course, grew this effort to further interview former slaves. A little more than 2,000 former slaves were found throughout the United States, and they were interviewed. And the papers were sent to Washington, and for almost 30 years, they were just there in Washington. Eventually, George P. Rowick came through with a number of graduate students. He pulled all of those papers together in a composition called the American Composite, and essentially we know them as the Works Project Administration, or the WPA slave narratives. And 2,000 slaves were interviewed. Understand now that these individuals are 75, 80, 90, 95, and the oldest person was 112 years of age. At least he said he was 112 years of age. And was upset when people challenged that he was 112 years of age. But as I read these, the readings for today, I thought about the WPA narratives and the problems that historians have with narratives, with people talking about what happened to them 25 years ago, 30 years ago, 50 years ago. In the case of these former slaves, 60 years ago. How good is your memory? Now, when you actually read what Ulysses S. Grant tells us, just how much stake can we put in that? How accurate was he? And the other readings as well. 20 years on down the road, looking back, trying to recount what happened. Sometimes we find it difficult to recount what happened a couple of days ago. And now to pin it and put it in a fashion that, are you adding hyperbole? Are you glorifying self? Are you putting down one group of individuals? All kinds of questions. Do you have a pet hypothesis that you're trying to advance? And in the case of those former slaves, many of whom were still living on the farms and plantations they were living on in 1865. And when you consider the fact that the individuals who interviewed them were not someone from Washington or from New York or Philadelphia or Boston, but they were from Orange County, North Carolina. They were from Durham County. They were from Wake County. They were from Mississippi. They were from a county or a town right there in Alabama. The banker's daughter. And you're trying to get a loan. Now, what do you say about your former slave owner? What do you say about who happened in many cases to be the descendants of those individuals? So historians have warned us to be careful when we read what others have written about their experiences 25, 30, 40, 50 years behind us. So let's think about that, and I hope that you have thought, I'm sure most of you have thought about that, without a doubt. How reliable are the words of Ulysses S. Grant? But in addition to that particular question, I want you to also think about it as we break up into our groups. Think about how you might portray the past. Think about when you talk about yesterday today. How truthful are you? Do we lie sometimes about yesterday for the sake of whatever the case might be? Glorification, ego. I know more about it than you. You don't really know about that. Yes, I do too. I remember. No, how do you know people? How do you know that? How do you know that we know that you're not lying? All those kinds of questions might arise. So think about that. In addition to thinking about how you actually recount the past today, think about perhaps the importance of just plain old memory. Think about just physical memory as we read. And historians are taught to be critical. We're taught to believe absolutely nothing we read. And perhaps one of the reasons why we have so many books on the life of George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and Abraham Lincoln, every year there's a new book. There's a new book on Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. Stuff continues to pour out about Malcolm X. And much of it has to do with the fact that we do have new information about some of these individuals. But we just don't believe what the previous historian said about that particular individual. We have a different take. It's called interpretation. All of us can look at the same body of information and come away with a different interpretation because all of us bring our own baggage to the table. That baggage is ethnicity, it's race, it's religion, it's gender. I could write a 100-page history of Durham, North Carolina from 1881 to 1950. I might have 31 different interpretations. Women might have an altogether different take. on a black person might have surely a different interpretation than someone who has been spoon-fed and believed that Durham is the community. This is one of the best communities in the South. Now, if you believe that, then sometimes in the face of data which shows something else altogether, you will still, write what you really believe. You will stick to that interpretation. So, this notion that you don't really believe anything you read, I think carries a lot of weight. It doesn't mean that you're cynical. It means that you always go into the project understanding that this is one person's interpretation of what happened. You won't find a book entitled The History of North Carolina. You should not find a book entitled The History of the United States. Hopefully it might be called A History, because that is, those authors' interpretation of American history or North Carolina history. All right. Yes, ma'am.
And in fact, there's been a shift in the content in the last 50, 60 years. Would you address the availability of sources for social and demographic history?
50 years ago, when you picked up a textbook on American history, very little was said about women, very little about American Indians or Native Americans, very little about slavery, about blacks. There has been a tremendous shift, I would say in the last 40 years. Textbooks, I think I review 10, 12 textbooks a year on American history, at least 2 a year on African American history. Some of them make it, some of them don't make it. And that's why they send them out to reviewers. And if you slap it real good, perhaps it will not make it. I've seen some good ones in the last 4 or 5 years, some very good ones in terms of coverage. Gary Nash and others put an American history textbook together back in 1989. And that textbook contained the names of Frederick Douglass, Sojourner Truth, Dr. Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, more times than it did Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, your founding fathers. So the belief is that we're not going to look at history from the top down. We will look at it from the bottom up. And that has not been, the paradigm in the last 20 years. People still, for the most part, represent American history from the top down rather than from the bottom up. But I think we're doing a much, much better job in the last 10 to 15 years.
What's your assessment of how it Zen's or people's history of the United States?
Zen's book, Without a Doubt, and Zen, of course, just died, 2 years ago, maybe?
Yeah.
Zen's book represents, it's an antithetical attempt to explain American history from, sometimes I say he actually goes beneath the ground and bring it to the forefront. His book, of course, has not received the kind of so-called mainstream attention that others have, because he has taken the argument too far, in the eyes of some people, too far to the left. But you need that kind of interpretation. You need the interpretation of the conservative. We need all of those interpretations. Scott?
Did you read a guy named Paul Johnson, a British conservative writer, and he wrote a very reactionary piece called A People's History of the United States, or History of the People of the United States. And it's the right-wing version of that, whereas you can't get Zinn to stop talking about the Haymarket Massacre, you can't find it in Johnson. Right?
Yeah.
So, it's just like my dad, in fear when I was going to graduate school, that sort of guy, that I would encounter Zinn's book, sent me Johnson's in advance. parts of it are very interesting to read and somewhat very accurate till he gets into about his lifetime. And it's funny to see how his perspective changes. You know, I joke with my dad that I don't know what Kennedy ever did to Johnson, and I don't know, he must owe Nixon money to make him look that good. You know, so it just got...
Oh,
Yeah, so I didn't know if you had a chance to read that book.
I haven't seen that.
Yeah, so...
Spelman pushed him out. This
Yeah.
is the middle of the civil rights movement. And he was very much involved as well with the students and in the movement. And, well, after all, King's Church in Montgomery, they fired him. So history is very, very complex.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
When you think about King County. And people were afraid, I'm sure that perhaps the administrators at Spelman or the
Yeah.
ministers at the church in Montgomery were afraid of what would happen to their institutions if they had such a person there.
Black institutions are very conservative.
Mhm.
I think when we look at them historically, extremely conservative, and they're likely, in many cases, less likely to deal with so-called radical idealists, less likely to give credence to those notions of, you know, well, communism, the left, so to speak. It's been a struggle. I think over the years, historians and sociologists and others have struggled, and many of them have left those institutions because they felt that they could not express themselves, you know, in the manner in which they wanted. Yes.
Just one opportunity that folks like you have in a local community is to do local history or do family history. And the oral history interview has been a methodology since the 1945. It was initially used by great men. It started in Columbia, Allen Evans, with the presidents and their staff. But the Southern Oral History Program at UNC has been looking at movements that had ordinary people in it, like the textile mill folks in the Piedmont area of North Carolina. But it drops down. Your family histories can be compiled. And when he was talking about different viewpoints, just think how you and your sister and your mother and your father and your children think about one particular Christmas holiday.
Exactly.
And yet, it allows us to get out of the trenches of strict.
Yeah. I try to impress upon students all the time, those who are writing master's thesis, and I think that Chris will vouch for me on this, that all history is local. But somehow students think that we need to write about something out there, over yonder. You know, the grass somehow seems greener on the other side, and you get over there and it's real nice and brown. The green stuff is right here. And that's why I was so proud when one of my graduate students came to me last week, about 2 weeks ago. I've been trying to convince him to write, he's from Durham, to write a local history. He wanted to write about the Civil War on a national scale. I said, no, you know, an 85, 90-page master's thesis, you can't do that. But I want to show how black people were divested of guns, and that led to some, I never did get what it was that he was trying to show. But finally, he went to talk with his mother and father, with members of his family. And I'd already told him that many of our students were writing histories about those schools, those black schools, like Hillside, like Central High School in Hillsborough, like this school, like that school. I've had 8 students in the last 5 years to produce master's theses on schools like James E. Shepherd High School in Zebulon, North Carolina, or like Lincoln High School over in Chapel Hill, or the black schools down in Pitt County, the old black school down in Wilson County, and others. And so when he came to me the other day and said, Dr. Parker, I found it. I said, what is it? I'm going to write a history of Little River High School. I jumped for joy, so I said, I want you to see Joanne, and I want you to see the folks down on the 3rd floor of the library. This will absolutely be fabulous. You know, Little River High School, I remember being in high school, we got to stop this too. I remember being in high school, and we played Little River. They had this awesome basketball team where they only needed to use 6 players. How many of you remember Little River High School? Little River, and nobody has done anything on Little River that I know about. Nobody has done anything on Merritt Moore High School here in Durham County.
And what's so interesting, I looked at the elementary schools, and I was wanting to write a paper until Durham County had a African-American high school, but Little River was the first one, and I think it was built in 1945, is that about right?
Well, actually, it started out as a Rosenwald school. It did not?
No.
Okay.
Mill Grove was a Rosenwald school, and they added high school classes, and then those transferred to Little River. But as far as I could tell, there was no Rosenwald. Rosenwald had sort of quit doing direct money to schools by 1945.
Okay, he was telling me the other day that he had taken the story back to about 1921, and that some of those individuals got started. Well, we'll find out. We'll find out what the story really is. I don't know.
I mean, they've got a wonderful little museum there that Ms. Johnson, that they can have research. But it's amazing to find. There's almost there are no records. There's almost no archives. It's wonderful that he's going to be doing this.
Yeah, hey, it's just wonderful. Sorry, go ahead.
There's a Facebook site called You Must Be Old School. So all of us that have gone to some of these, well, from Durham in the old days.
Right. And which school did you attend?
Hillside High School.
Hillside, okay.
And so there are all kinds of pictures that people have. Some that got into the library, others that they had in their own collection. So that would be some sources.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, his grandmother finished Little River, and he didn't know. He knew that she had finished Little River, but he didn't know that she had a scrapbook. She has a scrapbook with photographs and all kinds of stuff. His mother finished it.
The way to go and have him interview Ann Atwater, because it became a charter school of her name in the 90s.
Okay.
And get her on that development of the property before it's done.
Yeah, because we do need to. My mother finished Hillside, and she's 96.
Yeah.
We just lost a Tuskegee Airman
Yeah.
about a couple of weeks before. So we do need to.
It's all local.
It is.
You know, we think about, I want to do something about people in California. Well, let the folks who are local there, California, you need to do something that is local. And I try to tell them that, you know, every day, do something related to your family's history. Then when you get old, you know, you won't try to do it all at one time. Do something every day. Because I think that we think that our lives are unimportant, maybe, and that you write about people over yonder. We write about Barack Obama. We write about this person. We write about actresses and actors and people who have so-called made it. But what's important, what is so important is that we must understand that my history is just as important as anybody else's history. What human being is more important than I? You know, I have the same number of fingers, the same number of toes. You know, when God made me, he didn't make anybody else. I'm unique. You know, you say you're unique. So if I'm unique, then my history must be unique. So I need to go back and find, you know, those grandparents and those great-great-grandparents and those uncles and those aunts. And I think you need to impress upon your children the importance of doing something, if not every day, at least once a week, to try to ensure that I keep the family story alive. Mr. Sam?
If you go back a ways, you were talking about things that are in the textbooks and so forth and so on. There's one experience that I had that I've never forgotten. Now, I admit immediately, at my age now, some things happened yesterday that I don't remember. So I was 5 years old, and we lived in Evanston, Illinois. My parents were from Abbeville, South Carolina.
The home of John C. Calhoun.
Right. No, it was the home of, see, I can't. My great-grandfather, he was a slave during the war. He drove the wagons that carried the food for the Confederate soldiers. And he talked about that. And that's the only part of that I remember. But what I do remember was the matter of the slaves' association with the paddy wagons and the people who ran the paddy wagons. And nobody talks about that. Even John Hope, in his book, The Runaway Slaves, he didn't mention that. But I remember this, that my great-grandfather said they would go out at night and have parties and dances, but they had to get in before the paddy wagon guys got out there. Said if they got out there, we just stopped and whipped them right then, and then went on home. So, but nobody writes about that.
Yeah, very, very little has been written about the paddy rollers,
Yeah.
or the patrol system. There's only one article on the patrol system in North Carolina. Only one article, published in the North Carolina Historical Review some years ago. And much of it has to do with the fact that we just don't have the kinds of records that we need to really reconstruct that story. I mean, we know that, for example, in 1753, it was established in North Carolina. Here, the colony was established in 1663, and the patrol system was not established until 1753. And it was a county-based organization. So you would think that there would be all these county records for North Carolina, but North Carolina, you know, our folk just kept awful records or no records. No records. I mean, the fact is that when you look at the origins of North Carolina, and you look at the origins of South Carolina, and you look at the people who settled both of these states, that might give you an idea about why. The people who settled North Carolina, for the most part, were uneducated. Many of them had come over from Virginia. They were what John Spencer Bassett referred to as the untutored, the unlearned. They were individuals who had been in prison. They were debtors, as opposed to the folks who came into South Carolina and established Charlestown.
And Virginia.
Yeah, and Virginia as well. Those folks who came into Charlestown, of course, were coming from Barbados. They were wealthy people. They brought their slaves with them. And so Charlestown takes off. And so the population takes off, rice takes off. But in North Carolina, it was slow. It was really slow development.
No port.
No port. We hated authority as we hate authority today. We absolutely hated the governor, and that persisted until today. When did the governor of North Carolina get veto power? Huh?
80s.
1992.
Jim Hart.
Yeah.
I think it must 49 states had it for all those years. Hawaii, Alaska. But our governor received it in 1992. And when you look at the history of power in North Carolina, it was always in the General Assembly. And that persists right down to the present time. And for the first time in 100 years, it's a different arrangement. You know, what happened a couple of years ago, Republicans took over, and we have seen some changes like we haven't seen in a mighty, mighty long time over the past year and a half or so.
Even two terms in a row, Terry Sanford was ineligible to run for a second term from 60 to 64.
He was
Ineligible to run for a second term. I think Hunt was
okay,
the
right,
first
yeah,
second term governor, and so.
exactly. And so North Carolina was known as a Rip Van Winkle state because we lagged in every way, I guess, here, politically, socially, judicially, you name it. Most people could not read. I think it was 1910 that the census indicated that more people could read than could not in North Carolina. So it was referred to as the backward state. It was the Rip Van Winkle state, the last state in the South to get, state-supported education. That was 1839. Other states had already done, and then it wasn't true state-supported education really until after the Civil War. Real state-supported education.
Can I make a paid advertisement for historic sites? Tuesday at 1 o'clock in the legislature, they are presenting the proposal that the 3 historic sites in Durham County lose 2 of its 3 site managers.
Amen.
But if you want to take a car full to Raleigh, 1 o'clock, you won't have to probably even sign your name or testify. But just because Durham County people walk in on Tuesday, it will make a difference. That's all I need to,
Well, I mean, I hate to really take up our time, but this is all good, isn't it?
Yeah.
But cultural resources is under assault.
Yes, it is.
And they have really been under assault for a long time, but especially since the Republicans, came to power a year and a half or so ago. I serve as chair of the African American Advisory Board down at Tryon Palace. In October 2010, I don't know if you all have been down, but there's this wonderful new education center. Nothing quite like it in southeastern North Carolina. $40 million, I think is what it was. Big day, the governor was there, and all these folks were there to open it. But some of the folks who were there actually had something else planned for Tryon Palace. It, for example, lost about 57% of its funding. Went from about 82 employees down to about 55. If they don't get that funding back in the next cycle, they will be down to 31 employees. It's incredible. We are doing things to raise money to keep the doors open. You may know that Spencer Shops up in Spencer, North Carolina. Spencer will no longer be supported by the state of North Carolina. It will become a receipt-based site altogether now. And so, as was pointed out, what they're trying to do with the sites here in Durham County, it is likely that some sites will close. It's unfortunate. If they don't close, it means that they'll have shorter hours beginning perhaps after July 1st. But cultural resources, it seems to be the first hit. Because a lot of people believe that museums, archives, the kinds of things that we're doing here today are really unimportant. How does this bring money to North Carolina?
or save lives.
Yeah.
I don't want to be partisan, but we had one of our people running for president nominee who said 2 days ago that did not really see the value of a college education. And I know in American history, we have these strains of anti-intellectualism, so I don't know whether we're in one of those periods.
This is tragic. This is tragic.
Yeah.
Well, I'll say that whenever you can support cultural resources, and cultural resources covers a lot. You know, it covers the museums, it covers archives, it covers our 27 historic sites across the state, historic sites across North Carolina. There have been attempts to close Reed's gold mine or to actually move it from state to county support. So you know, it's been under assault. Museums are closing. The one down in Fayetteville, I think the Cape Fear Museum is closing.
And they're, Albemarle, the one that just put up a new exhibit, is on the chopping block. And yet, we need to support the archaeological work being done near Morganton as the first lost colony with Spanish soldiers.
Exactly. Yeah, that's under assault as well. But I carried two groups of students and faculty to the Museum of the Albemarle last summer. Wonderful. I mean, they just built the place. And now they're talking about doing something that's dramatically different than what it's designed to do. So, you know, we have to fight.
Yes.
And I just talked to a group of students, one this past week, and one young man was talking about the fact that, you see, voting doesn't do any good anyway. They're making a difference. They're going to do what they want to do anyway. So I said, let me share this with you. You have a wife. Your wife is a school teacher. It is likely that over the past few years, your wife has been under tremendous stress and strain because of what has been happening in the classroom. Number one, she has more students, or will have more students. She just lost her teacher. This is an elementary teacher. Just lost her teacher, assistant, and all of the stuff that she comes home complaining about. To you, you tell me that my wife, man, she come home complaining, da 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 da. I said, but you know what? She wouldn't have lost the teaching assistant had more people gone out and voted in November 2010 the way I think they should have voted. that she would not have more students. She would not have all of these woes that you're talking about had you taken some other folk with you who took some folks with you to go out and vote. But you said, I didn't vote. I didn't vote. So, you're saying that things are a little rough in your house. When you touch your wife, she said, get your hands off me now. Had you gone out and voted, taking 10 people with you, who took 10 people with you, who took 10 more people with you, and voted the way I think, then she would have said, embrace me, dog.
There was a state senator in Virginia that changed his position on this new thing with the vaginal sonogram because he said when he got home, his wife was very cold. He came back, he changes his position and why.
Exactly. So, you know, so when I ran down about 8 or 10 reasons why, you know, you're not getting what you think you ought to be getting at home, he said, oh, okay, all right, I mean, okay, all right, I see now. So hopefully, this year he'll go out and vote.
Several years ago on C-SPAN, I saw a program with Benjamin O. Davis, the commander of the Tuskegee Airmen, and they brought up the question about gays in the military. And he gave an answer that was the standard military answer. And he said he went home that night, and his wife said, well, did anything interesting happen? She said, yes, and he described his answer. He's like, do you think that is what should be pursued? And he's like, well, yeah, I said so. Why don't you go think again and talk back to those people tomorrow? And I did, and I have.
Yeah. Well, whenever you can support cultural resources, in a way like going down to Raleigh, please go out, because they need help. I tell you, cultural resources has probably lost 50% of its funding in the past 10 years. They've gone from X million dollars down to, $8 million. And which means a lot of people have been laid off. The doors not open as long as they used to be. So go out to support cultural resources whenever you can. All right. This young lady, what's your name? Your name?
Sylvia Robert.
Okay. She came in and said, I want you to lecture today. I said, I'm going to talk 5 minutes. Oh, wow. It's been, what, 50 minutes. And the rest of the time, this is your class. This is your time. And so I want you all to get in your groups, discuss these readings, and then we're going to come back together. Let's come back together in about, since the readings are not as long as time, we'll come back together in 20 minutes, and a representative from each group will come up and give us a summary.